Listen closely, Madam Secretary, because I have something to say. Dan Bongino tilted forward in his seat, his queen's intonation becoming as sharp as a switchblade being unsheathed. I dedicated a dozen years to shielding individuals in your position while serving in the Presidential Protection Division of the Secret Service. Do you want to know the most significant lesson I took away from that experience? The individuals requiring the highest level of security are frequently the ones who merit it the least. Hillary Clinton's rehearsed grin wavered for a split second. Yet Bongino didn't miss the slip. He had dedicated years to analyzing expressions, hunting for the subtle giveaways that distinguish honesty from deception. That momentary twitch revealed everything he needed to understand about her state of mind. She was already shaken, and he hadn't even begun to unload his primary arguments yet. The concept for this CNN town hall had been entirely her proposal from the start. The central topic was meant to be police accountability, and Hillary had styled herself as the authority on overseeing the Justice Department, acting as the rational voice demanding change. For the previous hour, she had been preaching to a sympathetic crowd regarding the perils of turning law enforcement into a political weapon, emphasizing independent agencies and safeguarding democracy from tyrants. Then, Anderson Cooper had brought out Deputy FBI Director Dan Bongino. Hillary's entire attitude had shifted instantly. The patronizing smirk had surfaced, the specific look she saved for those she deemed beneath her station. She saw him as a former radio host, a conservative media figure, and a beat cop from Queens, playing make-believe in a role he lacked the credentials to hold. She had cut in before Cooper could even complete his opening inquiry, directed at Bongino. "Anderson, I believe we must address the obvious issue right here," she said, releasing that laugh that caused half the country to recoil. "Mr. Bongino, pardon me, Deputy Director, spent years on his show promoting hazardous conspiracy narratives regarding the Bureau, myself, and our intelligence community." The spectators clapped, as they were her hand-picked supporters. These were carefully chosen Democrats who had arrived to applaud her, offering the adoration she desired to help reconstruct her public persona for whatever political return she was scheming. "He is unfit for the office he currently occupies," Hillary went on, her tone saturated with the Ivy League disdain she had honed over decades. "He is a partisan operative who poses a threat to law enforcement integrity. He may have guarded presidents, but he evidently failed to grasp how the government actually functions." The crowd offered more applause. Anderson Cooper adjusted his posture in the moderator's seat, looking uneasy and unsure if he should step in. This situation was clearly deviating from the planned script. Bongino remained seated in silence, jotting down points on a yellow legal pad. His jaw was clenched tight. Those familiar with him identified that sign, yet his expression stayed tranquil and professional. He had handled situations far more severe than Hillary Clinton. He had stared down potential assassins, terrorists, and narcotics traffickers who intended to assassinate the President of the United States. A faded politician attempting to rescue her legacy did not intimidate him. When Hillary eventually concluded her opening attack, clearly pleased that she had reprimanded this newcomer, Bongino placed his pen down with great intention. "It was the manner in which you place an object down when your patience has officially run out. Are you finished, Madam Secretary?" His tone was low, almost suspiciously calm. "I ask because I have been anticipating this specific discussion for quite some time." Hillary's smirk grew broader. She believed she had already secured the victory. She assumed she had cowed him into silence with her resume, her arrogance, and her meticulously manufactured reputation as the nation's most qualified public official. She had absolutely no clue what was about to hit her. Bongino reached down next to his seat and hoisted a heavy three-ring binder, the specific type federal agents utilize for case dossiers, the sort that holds evidence arranged for a trial. "Let me clarify something regarding conspiracy theories," he started, his Brooklyn inflection beginning to pierce through his professional polish. "A conspiracy theory is when someone levies wild charges lacking any proof. What I intend to do now is display facts, documentation, your own statements, your personal emails, and hard evidence." He cracked open the binder. Hillary's grin solidified on her face. "You see, the interesting aspect of serving as Deputy FBI Director is the access." Bongino stared straight at her, his gaze steely. "I possess the clearance for files, a massive amount of files, and unlike certain individuals, I actually take the time to read them." The room had fallen silent. Even Cooper was leaning in now, realizing that this carefully orchestrated forum was on the verge of spiraling completely out of control. "You brought up my tenure in the Secret Service," Bongino went on. "You are correct. I did safeguard presidents. I held a top-secret SCI clearance. Do you understand what that classification entails, Madam Secretary? That stands for Sensitive Compartmented Information, which is the highest level of security classification that exists." He hesitated, allowing the gravity of that statement to land. "Do you know what my fate would have been if I had transmitted classified data via my personal email account? If I had housed top-secret documents on a server located in my bathroom?" He did not pause for her response. "I would be sitting in a federal penitentiary. Not possibly, not likely, but absolutely. I would be stripped of my clearance, my employment, my retirement benefits, and my liberty. And do you know what? That is precisely the punishment that should befall anyone who is negligent with classified intelligence." Bongino turned the page in the binder to a section marked with a tab. "However, let us discuss your email since you raised the issue of my credentials." Hillary's complexion had drained of some of its warmth. She began to say something, but Bongino continued without stopping. He had spent far too many years hearing her fabrications to allow her to twist this narrative. "FBI investigation summary, Clinton email probe." He displayed a document for the cameras to capture. "There were 33,142 emails transmitted or accepted through your private server during your tenure as Secretary of State. Hundreds of those communications contained classified material." He extracted another sheet, reading verbatim from the text. "This specific email, sent on June 14, 2011, is labeled Top Secret Special Access Program. That stands for SAP, Madam Secretary. Do you comprehend the significance of that designation? That represents intelligence so delicate that even individuals with top-secret clearance are forbidden from viewing it without specific authorization." His volume was increasing now, the restrained anger beginning to seep out. "This email concerned drone strike missions, identities of intelligence sources, and operational specifics. And where was it housed? On your private server in your basement in Chappaqua, New York." He slammed the paper onto the table situated between them. "This document is marked secret, no foreign. That implies no foreign citizens are permitted to view detailed discussions with international leaders. It contained intelligence evaluations regarding their regimes, stored on your bathroom server." Hillary attempted to cut in. "That matter has been fully litigated, and the FBI investigated and concluded." "The FE concluded you were exceptionally careless," Bongino interrupted her, his Brooklyn accent now distinct. "That is a verbatim citation from Director Comey. Would you prefer I read the entire declaration, because I have it right here?" He turned to a different tab. "Although we did not discover clear proof that Secretary Clinton or her associates intended to breach laws governing the handling of classified data, There is evidence they were extremely careless in their treatment of very sensitive, highly classified intelligence. Bongino gazed up at her. Extremely careless with top-secret data, information that had the potential to get individuals killed. And do you know what consequence you faced? He raised his hands in a gesture of feigned bewilderment. Nothing. Not a single thing. No prosecution, no criminal charges, not even a minor reprimand. The audience was completely quiet now. Even Hillary's backers were at a loss for words. These were not fringe theories. This was the former FBI director's own declaration being recited by the current deputy FBI director. Yet Bongino was not finished. He was not even near the end. "Let us discuss what occurred after you were detected," he stated, his voice lowering to that menacing whisper again. "After you were served a subpoena, after you received a lawful command to safeguard evidence." He produced a technical analysis report. 33,000 emails vanished. Just like magic, they were gone. You asserted they were private matters, wedding arrangements, yoga schedules, harmless content. Bongino's laugh was abrasive. It was nothing like Hillary's rehearsed cackle. However, they were not merely deleted, were they? They were obliterated. They were professionally annihilated, utilizing a software known as BleachBit. He clarified for the spectators, his voice adopting the instructional tone he had mastered on his radio show. BleachBit is not comparable to emptying your recycle bin. It is not simply hitting the delete key. It is professional-grade software designed for evidence destruction. It overwrites the data multiple times, ensuring that nobody, not the FBI, not the NSA, nor anyone else can ever retrieve it. It is the sort of tool narcotics traffickers utilize. Mob chieftains, individuals who possess something they need to conceal. He sat back, extending his hands wide. 33,000 emails regarding yoga, lady? I do not believe you have performed 33,000 yoga poses in your entire existence. A handful of people in the crowd actually chuckled. They could not help themselves. Even Hillary's devoted fans could perceive the ridiculousness. Hillary's face was red now. Those were private communications, and I possessed every right. After you were subpoenaed, Bongino fired back. That is not a right. That constitutes destruction of evidence. That is obstruction of justice. He extracted another document. Do you know who actually goes to prison for mishandling classified data? Let me inform you. Let me tell you about the individuals who follow the rules you believe do not apply to you. His voice was elevating again. Passion was overriding protocol. Christian Saucier, a Navy sailor, captured photographs inside a submarine. 6 images resulted in a year in federal confinement. Reality Winner, an NSA contractor, leaked a single classified paper to the media. She received 63 months in federal prison. Brian Nishimura, a naval reservist, downloaded classified materials to his personal devices. He received 2 years of probation, a $50,000 penalty, and the forfeiture of his security clearance. Bongino's finger was poking at the desk now with every name mentioned. These are actual human beings, real lives ruined for committing a fraction of what you did. And do you know what the distinction is? He gazed directly at Hillary. They were not wealthy. They were not politically connected. They were not Clintons. They were simply ordinary Americans who made errors and paid the cost. Meanwhile, you established an entire private server network, conducted all your State Department affairs on it, transmitted and accepted classified data for 4 years, and then annihilated evidence while under subpoena. The silence was crushing. And you are sitting here preaching to me about responsibility? Anderson Cooper finally recovered his voice. Secretary Clinton, Do you wish to offer a response? Hillary's hands were shaking slightly. Bongino observed it. He had unsettled her, and they both realized it. This is precisely the sort of partisan witch hunt that— Partisan! Bongino's voice snapped like a whip. I am reading from the FBI director's personal statement. Your own emails and federal court filings. These are facts, not political attacks. He turned to a fresh section of his binder, and Hillary visibly recoiled. But you are correct about one thing, Bongino said, his tone changing. The emails were merely the symptom. Let us discuss the disease. Let us talk about the Clinton Foundation. This was the point where things were going to get truly ugly, and everyone in the studio could sense it. Bongino brought out financial records, laying them out across the desk. You served as Secretary of State from 2009 to 2013, 4 years. During that period, the Clinton Foundation accepted over $2 billion in contributions. He allowed that figure to hang in the atmosphere. $2 billion for a charity that, according to charity watchdog organizations, expends less than 10% of its income on actual charitable endeavors. Hillary attempted to break in, but Bongino simply kept driving forward. He was in full prosecutor mode. Now, let us examine who was donating, shall we? And let us examine what occurred after they donated. He produced a timeline chart. Uranium One, a Russian nuclear agency, desires to purchase a company that controls 20% of America's uranium output. This transaction necessitates approval from 9 government bureaus, including the State Department. Your State Department. Bongino's finger followed the timeline. Russian interests contribute $145 million to the Clinton Foundation. Your spouse, Bill, receives a payment of $500,000 for a single speech in Moscow. And then, strictly by coincidence, the State Department ratifies the deal. He glanced up at her. Now, I am just a guy from Queens who was raised above a candy shop, but where I come from, we refer to that as a bribe. The audience gasped. Hillary's face had transitioned from red to nearly purple. How dare you? She stammered. I was not personally involved in that determination. The State Department has career officers who— You expect us to believe, Bongino interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm, that the Secretary of State possessed no influence over her own department's major policy judgment. That you had absolutely no clue this was transpiring. He extracted an organizational chart. Here is the State Department hierarchy. Here lies your office. Here lies your authority. Either you are lying about your participation, or you are confessing you were such an inept Secretary of State that you did not know what your own department was doing with one of the most significant nuclear agreements in years. He leaned in closer. So, which is it? Corrupt or incompetent? Because it has to be one or the other. Hillary's mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. For a woman who had spent her entire career formulating careful answers to tough inquiries, she suddenly had nothing to say. Bongino pressed his advantage. Let us discuss Haiti, he said, and his voice adopted an edge of authentic anger. The 2010 earthquake was a terrible tragedy. Hundreds of thousands perished. Billions in relief funds poured in from around the globe. He produced more documents. The Clinton Foundation positioned itself as a primary coordinator of relief operations. Your brother, Tony Rodham, somehow secured a gold mining contract in Haiti. Foundation projects received priority. Foundation donors received access. His voice was climbing again. Meanwhile, Haitians are still residing in tents more than a decade later. The funds vanished into projects that never came to fruition. But your foundation certainly did well from it. He read from testimony provided by Haitian activists. The Clinton Foundation utilized our tragedy to raise capital and enrich themselves. They promised to build back better. They built nothing except their own fortune. Bongino looked at Hillary with undisguised disdain. You used a natural catastrophe, the suffering of the poorest people in the Western Hemisphere, to enrich your family and your nonprofit. That is not public service. That is exploitation. Those are discredited allegations from, Hillary began. Discredited by whom? Bongino fired back. You, your associates, and the media outlets you donate to. He produced a list of foreign contributions. Saudi Arabia gave $10 to $25 million to your foundation. Qatar gave $1 to $5 million. Kuwait, Oman, UAE, millions each. His fingers stabbed at each entry. These nations do not exactly possess stellar records on women's rights or human rights. Saudi Arabia literally executes people in public squares, yet they donated millions to your foundation while you were Secretary of State. Bongino pulled out meeting logs and arms deal authorizations, and look what occurred. A donation from Saudi Arabia in March 2011, a meeting with you in April. A massive arms deal approved in May, $29 billion in weapon sales. He displayed document after document. Qatar donates, secures a meeting, and receives special consideration for hosting the World Cup, despite credible allegations of slave labor. Kuwait donates and gets weapons deals signed. The pattern is clear as day. Donate to the Clinton Foundation. Gain access to Secretary Clinton. Get what you desire from the U.S. government. Bongino's voice was filled with revulsion. That is not charity. That is money laundering through a foundation. That is pay to play. That is corruption. Hillary was gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles were white. And here is the most revealing thing, Bongino said, extracting a graph. Here represent Clinton Foundation donations over time. See this spike? That is when you became Secretary of State. Donations explode. Foreign governments tripping over themselves to give you cash. He traced the line across the chart. And here, right here, is when you lost the 2016 election, when you had no more power to peddle. The graph showed contributions plummeting. If this was truly about charity, about aiding people, why did the money dry up the second you lost? Why did all those foreign regimes suddenly stop caring about your benevolent work? He did not wait for an answer, because they were not donating out of the kindness of their hearts. They were purchasing access, buying influence, and buying favors from the United States government. And when you had nothing left to sell, they ceased buying. Bongino sat back, but he wasn't done. Not even close. You want to discuss my time in the Secret Service? His voice dropped, becoming more personal, more emotional. Let me tell you what we learned in that profession. Lesson number 1, you protect the principal. Lesson number 2, you never abandon people in the field. Never. He pulled out photographs, 4 faces, Ambassador Chris Stevens, Sean Smith, Tyrone Woods, Glenn Doherty. He spoke each name slowly, carefully, with respect. Benghazi, September 11th, 2012. 4 Americans dead, after 13 hours of calling for help that never arrived. Bongino's voice was trembling now, not with anger, but with something deeper, with the fury of a man who had spent his career guarding people. Seeing someone who had failed that most basic duty. Ambassador Stevens sent cables, emails, and requests for additional security. He informed you Libya was dangerous. He informed you the security situation was crumbling. He informed you he required more protection. He produced the actual cables, holding them aloft. Requested in March, denied. Requested in April, denied. Requested in June, denied. Requested in August, denied. Each word landed like a hammer blow. And do you know what? Your State Department replied, resources unavailable. No funds for security, no personnel available, unable to assist you. Bongino's voice was growing louder. Yet you located resources to support regime change in Libya. You located resources to arm rebel factions. You found resources for everything except shielding our own people on the ground. He brought out the timeline of the assault. September 11th, attack commences at 9:40 p.m. local time. Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith seek shelter in the safe room. The compound is overrun. They perish from smoke inhalation. His voice cracked slightly. Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty were positioned at a CIA annex nearby. They heard the assault. They wanted to respond immediately. They were ordered to stand down, wait for local security. Bongino had to pause. He had to compose himself. They disobeyed orders. They went anyway because that is what operators do. They do not abandon people. They went to assist. They fought for hours, and they died on a rooftop waiting for backup that never arrived. The emotion in his voice was raw now. Real. This wasn't political theater. This was genuine rage from a man who understood what it meant to put your life on the line. 13 hours, he said quietly. They fought for 13 hours, called for aid, begged for air support, for quick reaction forces, for anything. He looked at Hillary. And help never arrived because you could not be bothered, because it was politically inconvenient, because you were too occupied planning your presidential campaign to save American lives. Hillary's face was ashen. Now, this was hitting her in a way the emails and the foundation scandals hadn't. And then, and this is what really demonstrates who you are, you lied to their families. Bongino pulled out testimony from the relatives of the fallen. Charles Woods, father of Tyrone Woods. He states you stood next to his son's casket and told him it was because of a YouTube video. A spontaneous protest gone wrong. Patricia Smith, mother of Sean Smith, states you looked her in the eye and promised to apprehend the man who made the video. Kate Quigley, sister of Glenn Doherty, states you told her the identical thing. Bongino's voice was shaking with barely controlled fury. But you knew it wasn't a YouTube video. You knew it was a planned terrorist assault because you sent an email that very night. He held up a printed email. Email to your daughter, Chelsea, 10:11 p.m., 2 hours after the attack started. Quote, 2 of our officers were killed in Benghazi by an Al-Qaeda-like group. Bongino read it slowly, making sure every word landed. An Al-Qaeda-like group. That is what you told your daughter. That is what you told the Egyptian Prime Minister the next day. That is what you told everyone who mattered. His voice rose to a shout. But you stood next to those caskets. You looked those mothers and fathers in the eye, and you lied to them about how their sons perished. The studio was completely silent, except for his voice. You told them it was a video, a protest, spontaneous violence when you knew it was terrorism. You knew it was a planned attack. You knew the truth. Bongino's hands were shaking as he pulled out the video clip reference. And then when you finally had to testify to Congress, when you had to answer questions about why you lied, you know what you said. He didn't need the document for this. He had it memorized. What difference at this point does it make? The silence after those words was crushing. Bongino let it stretch out. Let everyone absorb what she'd said, what she'd meant. Then, very quietly, he spoke. What difference does it make? I will tell you what difference it makes, Madam Secretary. His voice was deadly calm now, more frightening than when he'd been shouting. It makes a difference to Patricia Smith, who still doesn't have answers about why her son died. It makes a difference to Charles Woods, who knows you looked him in the eye and lied. It makes a difference to Kate Quigley, who lost her brother while you worried about your political future. He stood up now, unable to sit still anymore. It makes a difference to the next ambassador who gets sent to a dangerous posting and wonders if his Secretary of State will protect him or abandon him. It makes a difference to every Foreign Service officer who puts their life on the line and needs to know their government has their back. Bongino's voice rose again. It makes a difference to the American people who deserve leaders who tell the truth, who take responsibility, who value American lives more than political convenience. He was nearly shouting now. That is what difference it makes. Anderson Cooper was trying to regain control. We need to take a commercial break. But Bongino wasn't done. You called me a conspiracy theorist, he said, ignoring Cooper entirely. Let us talk about the biggest conspiracy theory in modern American history. The one you paid for. He flipped to a new section, and Hillary's eyes went wide. The Steele dossier, the Russia hoax, the biggest fraud ever perpetrated on the American people. Bongino pulled out payment records. Your campaign paid the law firm Perkins Coie. Perkins Coie paid Fusion GPS. Fusion GPS hired Christopher Steele, a foreign spy, to dig up dirt on your political opponent. He laid out the paper trail. Steele went to Russian sources, actual Russian intelligence operatives, and compiled a dossier full of salacious, unverified, ultimately false allegations against Donald Trump. Bongino's voice was scathing. You paid for Russian disinformation. You paid for a foreign spy to work with Russian intelligence to create fake evidence against your political opponent. And then you fed it to the FBI. You fed it to the media. You used it to trigger a special counsel investigation. He pulled out internal FBI documents. And you want to know the kicker? The FBI knew it was garbage. Internal FBI documents show agents called it uncorroborated, unreliable, impossible to verify. Bongino read from the documents. Unable to corroborate any of the substantive allegations. That is what the FBI said internally. But they used it anyway to get FISA warrants, to spy on American citizens, to launch investigations. His finger jabbed at Hillary. And it all traced back to you. Your campaign, your money, your dirty tricks. Hillary was trying to speak, trying to defend herself. But Bongino was rolling now. You couldn't accept that you lost. You couldn't believe that the American people rejected you. So you created this narrative that Trump was a Russian agent, that he'd stolen the election, that he was compromised. Bongino's voice was filled with contempt. You got your friends in the FBI to investigate, your friends in the media to amplify it 24/7, your friends in Congress to impeach him. 4 years. 4 years of investigations. He spread his hands. You know what they found? Nothing. No collusion, no conspiracy, no evidence. It was all a hoax you created, a hoax you paid for, a hoax you used to undermine a democratically elected president. Hillary finally found her voice. This is absurd. The Mueller investigation found no collusion, Bongino shouted. After 2 years and $40 million and 19 lawyers and 40 FBI agents, they found nothing. He was standing now, leaning toward her. But the damage was done, wasn't it? You poisoned half the country against their own president. You damaged our democracy. You made Americans distrust their institutions all because you couldn't handle losing. Anderson Cooper was practically begging. We really need to go to commercial. Hillary stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly. I don't have to sit here and be subjected to this character assassination. Character assassination. Bongino's laugh was harsh. I am reading from FBI files, federal documents, your emails, your foundation's tax returns. These are facts. Hillary started removing her microphone, her hands shaking. You called Trump's supporters deplorables, Bongino said, his voice suddenly quieter, but no less intense. Half the country just wrote them off as beneath you. Racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic. What was it you said? Irredeemable. He shook his head. You know what I see when I look at those people? I see my family. My neighbors from Queens, cops and firefighters and construction workers and nurses, people who work for a living, who love this country, who play by the rules. Bongino's voice was heavy with contempt. And you called them deplorable because they didn't bow down to you, because they didn't vote for you, because they saw through you. Hillary was gathering her things, clearly preparing to leave. This whole thing isn't about Democrat versus Republican, Bongino said, and his voice had changed. Become more personal, more real. It's about people like you versus people like us. He pointed at her, then at himself. You grew up in privilege. Park Ridge, Illinois, nice suburban childhood. Wellesley College, Yale Law School, Rose Garden wedding, White House, State Department, millions of dollars. Bongino's voice was thick with emotion. Now, I grew up in Queens, apartment above a candy store. My dad was a fireman. My mom worked in a Catholic school. I became a cop because that's what kids from my neighborhood did. Then Secret Service. I worked for everything I have. He stepped toward her. And the difference between us is this. I spent my career protecting people, serving people. You spent yours using them, exploiting them, getting rich off them, while they got poorer. Hillary had her microphone off now, was standing ready to leave. I don't have to listen to this, she said, but her voice was shaking. No, you don't, Bongino agreed. You can walk away just like you walked away from Ambassador Stevens, just like you walked away from those 4 men in Benghazi, just like you walk away from everyone who isn't useful to you anymore. Hillary's face contorted with rage. This is a lynching, a high-tech lynching. The studio went dead silent. Even her supporters looked uncomfortable with that comparison. Bongino just stared at her. And when he spoke, his voice was sad more than angry. A lynching is what happened to Black Americans who'd done nothing wrong but exist in a racist society. What's happening here is a law enforcement official reading from your public record and asking you to explain yourself. He gestured to his binder. These are facts, numbers, dates, your own words, your own emails, your own foundation's financial records, FBI case files, congressional testimony, all of it public, all of it verifiable. Bongino's voice hardened again. You're not being lynched. You're being held accountable. And you can't stand it because people like you never are. Hillary grabbed her purse and started toward the exit. Secretary Clinton, would you like to make a final statement? Anderson Cooper tried desperately to maintain some semblance of control over the disaster unfolding in his studio. Hillary turned at the door, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. I came here tonight to discuss important issues facing our country. Instead, I was subjected to a partisan attack filled with long-debunked conspiracy theories and personal insults. Her voice was shaking. The American people are smarter than this. They see through these tactics. They know the truth. Bongino called out from across the studio. Then why are you leaving? If you've got answers, give them. If you can explain the emails, the Foundation, Benghazi, the Russia hoax, explain them. Hillary just shook her head and walked out. The studio doors swung shut behind her with a heavy thud. The audience sat in stunned silence. Nobody knew what to do. Half of them had come to cheer Hillary on. Those people looked shell-shocked, as if they'd just watched their hero get destroyed. The other half, the ones who'd been skeptical of her from the start, looked vindicated. Anderson Cooper, ever the professional, tried to salvage something from the wreckage. "We're going to take a quick commercial break," he said, his voice strained. "When we come back, we'll continue with Deputy Director Bongino." As soon as they cut to commercial, the studio erupted in chaos. Producers were shouting. Camera operators were checking their footage. Social media teams were already posting clips. The control room was in full panic mode. Bongino sat back down in his chair, took a sip of water, and waited. 3 minutes later, they were back live. Cooper, to his credit, maintained his composure. "Deputy Director Bongino, Secretary Clinton has left the building. Would you like to make a closing statement?" Bongino looked directly into the camera, not at Cooper, at the millions of people watching at home. "This isn't about me versus Hillary Clinton." He began, his voice steady now, calm. "This is about whether we have one system of justice for the powerful and another for everyone else." He leaned forward slightly. "I've arrested people, personally arrested them for doing less than what she did with those classified emails. I've seen lives destroyed for mishandling a single classified document. I've watched good people lose everything because they made a mistake." His voice was heavy with conviction. "The American people deserve better than a two-tiered justice system. They deserve leaders who serve them, not themselves. Leaders who tell the truth, even when it's hard. Leaders who take responsibility instead of making excuses." Bongino paused. Secretary Clinton had every opportunity tonight to explain herself, to answer the questions, to address the evidence. Instead, she attacked me, personally, claimed victimhood, and walked out. He shook his head. "That tells you everything you need to know. When you can't argue the facts, you attack the person presenting them. When you can't defend your record, you claim you're being persecuted. When you can't win the argument, you leave." His voice softened slightly. "The families of those 4 men who died in Benghazi deserved better. The sailors and soldiers who went to prison for mishandling classified information deserved equal justice. The American people who believed the Russia hoax deserved the truth." Bongino looked directly into the camera. "That's what this is really about. Equal justice under law, not some people being above it. And until we have that, until powerful people face the same consequences as everyone else, we don't really have justice at all." Anderson Cooper nodded slowly. "Thank you, Deputy Director Bongino." As the show wrapped up, as the cameras stopped rolling, as the studio emptied out, Bongino sat there for a moment, thinking about the 4 men who'd died in Benghazi, about the sailors and soldiers in prison for doing a fraction of what Hillary had done, about all the people who played by the rules while the powerful rewrote them. His phone was already blowing up. Messages from former Secret Service colleagues, text from his wife, emails from conservative media wanting interviews. He ignored all of it. He'd said what needed to be said. The evidence spoke for itself. The American people could decide what it meant. As he packed up his binder and headed for the exit, a CNN staffer stopped him. "Sir, That was intense. The clip is already going viral. Bongino just nodded. He didn't care about going viral. He cared about truth, about accountability, about justice. He walked out into the New York night, the cool air a relief after the heat of the studio. His security detail fell in around him. Even deputy FBI directors needed protection these days, and they headed for the car. Tomorrow, the fallout would begin. Democrats would attack him. The media would try to spin it. Hillary's defenders would claim he'd been unfair, unprofessional, politically motivated. But the facts wouldn't change. The emails were real. The foundation corruption was documented. The Benghazi lies were on record. The Russia hoax had been exposed. Bongino had done what he set out to do. He'd laid out the evidence point by point, document by document, fact by fact. The rest was up to the American people, and something told him they were paying attention. Finally, the next morning, the story dominated every news cycle. Conservative outlets were triumphant. Bongino destroys Clinton live on CNN was the headline on a dozen sites. The clip had been viewed millions of times already. Hashtags were trending. But it wasn't just conservative media. Even mainstream outlets couldn't ignore what had happened. The evidence Bongino had presented was too detailed, too documented, too verifiable to dismiss as partisan attacks. Political analysts were calling it a catastrophic collapse for Hillary Clinton. Her carefully planned comeback, whatever it might have been, was over before it started. No serious political operative would touch her now. Democratic Party leadership was in damage control mode. Privately, many were relieved. Hillary had been a weight around the party's neck for years. Her insistence on remaining in the spotlight, on positioning herself as the moral authority of the Democratic Party, had been a liability. Younger Democrats were already distancing themselves. "We need to move forward, not backward," one rising star said in an interview. "The party has to be about the future, not relitigating the past." It was political speak for "Hillary Clinton is toxic, and we're done defending her." Polls showed the impact immediately. Trust in the FBI among conservatives jumped 10 points overnight. Not because they suddenly loved federal law enforcement, but because Bongino, one of their own, a guy from Queens who'd worked his way up, was finally holding the powerful accountable. Among independents, the reaction was more nuanced, but still significant. They appreciated seeing someone in authority willing to speak plainly about corruption and double standards. Whether they agreed with Bongino's politics or not, they respected his willingness to lay out evidence and let it speak for itself. Even some Democrats, quietly in private conversations, admitted they were relieved to see Hillary finally face consequences. They were tired of defending the indefensible, tired of the ethical clouds that seemed to follow the Clintons everywhere, tired of the "but her emails" jokes that had become shorthand for Democratic hypocrisy on accountability. Hillary herself disappeared from public view. No interviews, no statements beyond a brief tweet claiming she'd been ambushed on live television. Her defenders tried to rally on social media, but the effort felt half-hearted, performative. The simple truth was that Bongino had presented evidence they couldn't refute. FBI documents, her own emails, financial records, congressional testimony, all of it public, all of it verifiable. You couldn't spin that away. You couldn't claim it was fake news when it came from official government records. Dan Bongino returned to his office at FBI headquarters, declined all interview requests, and went back to work. He had a job to do, and grandstanding on television wasn't it. But in firehouses in Queens, in police precincts across America, in military bases and small towns and working-class neighborhoods everywhere, people felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. They felt like someone had finally stood up for them. someone who understood their lives, someone who knew what it was like to work for a living, to follow the rules, to play by a system that seemed rigged against regular people. While the powerful got away with everything, Bongino had given voice to their frustration, their anger, their sense that justice was supposed to be blind, not selectively enforced, based on your last name or your bank account, or your political connections. He'd done it not with empty rhetoric or political promises, but with evidence, with facts, with the patient, methodical presentation of a case that couldn't be denied. That was what made it powerful. That was what made it matter. The street fighter from Queens had taken on the former Secretary of State, the former First Lady, the woman who'd been the most powerful Democrat in America for a generation. And he'd beaten her with nothing but the truth. In a city, in a country where truth had become increasingly rare, that meant something. It meant everything. And in FBI offices and police departments across America, in Secret Service details and military units, men and women who'd spent their careers serving their country felt a sense of vindication. The rules did matter. Evidence did matter. Truth did matter. And sometimes, if you were brave enough to stand up and present it, justice could still win. Not always, not easily, but sometimes, and sometimes was enough to keep fighting. Bongino knew that better than anyone. He'd spent his whole life fighting as a cop, as an agent, as someone who believed that right and wrong weren't just suggestions, but principles worth defending. The fight wasn't over. It never really was. There would be other corrupt officials, other powerful people who thought they were above the law, other battles for truth and accountability. But for one night in one CNN studio, the street fighter had won.